Danielle Henderson. Michael DiMartini.
Here.
Bill Hauk.
Here.
Michael Drinkwater.
Here.
John Enlow.
Here.
John Flansburgh. Mickey Hazelwood. John Martini.
Here.
John Combs.
Here.
Dave Solero.
Here.
Mervyn Wright.
Here.
John Zimmerman.
Here.
Harry Fonstock. Thomas Payette.
Here.
Mylan Nugayan. Cindy Turchek. Ron Penrose.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, next item on the agenda is public comments, 3-minute time limit per person. I don't have any cards, so seeing no one coming forward, we're going to move on then to item number 3, which is approval of the agenda.
Move to approve, Mr. Chair.
Motion to approve, got a sec, and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 4 is approval of the minutes from August 7th, 2019. Are there any comments, discussion, possible changes? Not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Move to approve.
A motion to approve, do I have a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is a report on the draft 2019 update of Truckee Meadows Regional Plan and the process for its approval and possible direction to staff. Jeremy Smith, Interim Executive Director, Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Agency.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Jeremy Smith, Interim Director at TMRPA. Yep. Thank you, John. The hair will go as soon as the plan is adopted. So here to talk to you guys today about the Truckee Meadows Regional Plan update, which has been in process for a long, long time. And we're reaching the potential end here next Thursday. But before we talk about that timeline, I wanted to take you through the plan itself, some of the changes, and what we've been trying to accomplish.
Hey, Jeremy, yeah, I was just going to say that a remote works best if you point it this
Oh,
direction.
this way? Okay.
But yeah,
Let's
but
kinda
just, yeah.
do this.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, good.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you. This graphic here, this pyramid, is really showing the building blocks of how we got to the draft plan that we have out there today. It's available on the website plantruckeemeadows.org. You can download it. There's some interactive mapping, some scenario planning stuff you can check out, and you can leave comments about the plan, actually, if you want to say something there. But I'll start at the bottom with the first building block on the left. There's supportive efforts. I know that in the past I've come to talk to you guys about 2 efforts that we did at TMRPA that we completed. One was in 2013. It was the industrial land needs analysis. We took a deep look at industrial land that was vacant. How sort of shovel-ready was it? We looked at several factors like how close infrastructure pieces were to the land, that kind of thing. Building on that, we did the housing study in 2016, and that looked at 2 scenarios of the future. I worked with many of you to understand costs to serve the 2 different patterns in terms of capital infrastructure expenditures. So those are 2 main efforts, along with a lot of other little stuff that kind of helped build technical capacity and put us on a direction really kind of towards scenario planning and trying to use data and data analytics. So those supportive efforts were then bolstered by some foundational work that we took part in, a program at the Portland State University called the Urban Sustainability Accelerator. It's a year-long program. We started it off by going up to Portland. Staff from the local jurisdictions came with us. We met with planners up there at the metro area, elected officials. It was basically a professional advice program where we could, participate in like meetings, but also check in with this guy, Robert Liberty, and his team to get information about planning in general. We did a mid-year convening in Sacramento. We got to talk to the folks at the Sacramento Area Council of Governments and other regional planning apparatus. And we ended up hiring Mike McKeever, who used to be their director, to help us with our plan update as well. Some elected officials came with us on that and appointed RPC officials. But basically, it was a year-long program where we were testing the waters. What do we need to do to update this plan? We developed a work plan. We also commissioned 2 reports. One was about regional planning across the nation, and basically looking at a comparative analysis of what we do here with regional planning and how, is there an analog somewhere else? Not really. We're kind of unique, but there's similarities, right? So we learned quite a bit about that. One thing that we really lack that a lot of regional planning agencies have is they're the metropolitan planning organizations, and they have access to all the federal highway money. Here, that's the Regional Transportation Commission. And so and often with the MPOs, they're advisory. We have a regulatory component where we have conformance. For example, the Regional Water Management Plan needs to be in conformance with the regional plan. So a little bit different, but we're trying to also add in that analytics piece, that an advisory group would do. So we commissioned that report, and further we had a workshop we held over at the Innovation Center, looking at transit-oriented development corridors. We had a guy, G.B. Harrington, come in. He's an expert in that, and we had a pretty good turnout, and he also provided a short report about that. Really, the end result was that he felt that our community was really more transit-oriented, transit supportive, not really ready for the big fixed rail type stuff. So building on that, right, that was kind of the foundation of getting to that next step when in 2017, June, I think it was, the Regional Planning Governing Board said, here, take some money, go hire a consultant, and get started in earnest. And so that's when we really kicked off the plan update in earnest. We started meeting with the Regional Plan Update Working Group, which is a group of folks. Jim Smitherman himself was there as well, but it was staff from the 3 jurisdictions, the RTC, the school district, Western Regional Water, and some others. Some of you guys came and spoke at that a couple of times. That really fell into the building block in gray on the right, policy evaluation and development. We went through the old plan. The current regional plan has over 140 goals and policies in it. Super technical document, not very approachable by humans. And, it's this thing that it's difficult to implement is basically one of the issues we found. So we went through and we eliminated redundancies. We tried to coalesce policies to the degree that we could. We removed some stuff. We added a few things in, especially in natural resources section. But we got it down to 60 policies. So from 140 to 60 in 5 elements, and I'm going to go through those for you. So that was a huge effort. We met every week almost with that Regional Plan Update Working Group to hash it out. There was quite a bit of compromise that we ended up with at the end. But it seems like everybody is on board and can support the plan. We did that for about, a couple years. That's the hair. Scenario planning, I think I came and spoke to you guys about some of that. That's where we built on the housing study work. And we looked at 4 different ways our community could grow. And the idea was to make those future simulations of growth different enough that we could assess differential impacts. And we looked at 14 specific factors. I'm not going to list them all, but there were things like land utilization, how many acres were consumed to achieve the growth we forecast in the consensus forecast. How about housing mix? What kind of housing products were built? Obviously, where were they built? The locational aspect had impacts in terms of which wastewater treatment facilities, what was the burden to the future of that? School, student generation, water hookup fees. We ran everything through the transportation demand model. We tried to get a feel for vehicle miles traveled, average trip lengths, all of that stuff. That's all detailed in the plan draft if you want to go into the specifics of that. So all of that worked together to get us to this older draft I have here, but it's available again online, Plan Truckee Meadows. And all along the way, we've been trying to engage. So, we've had probably over 50 community meetings. We've gone out to any group that would listen to us all along the path here to tell them what we're up to and try to get folks involved. That is in addition to all the mailing and social media work that we do, newsletters, that kind of stuff, try to get out there. We did 7 online surveys with something called MetroQuest. Hopefully some of you guys took that. We had almost 4,000 respondents to the surveys looking at regional concerns, quality of life, the scenarios, trails, seniors, affordable housing. Really tried to get our arms around some of these issues and get some feedback. We hosted food for thought lunches where we provided lunch down in the downstairs conference room of the RTC building, and folks came and we talked about the plan. I know I saw John Enlow there at least once. We had 2 big community conversations at the Discovery Museum. One was about the scenarios. One was about recently, on September 18th, we talked about the plan draft and a lot of the stuff you're seeing today. And then again, obviously we were working with our Regional Planning Commission and Regional Planning Governing Board all along the way at every public meeting to keep them up to speed on where we were. We had a whole thing. We dropped policies on the RPC in early February of this year. And people kind of went, oh my God, what is this? And it went a little crazy. So we identified that some things seemed okay, but then there were some polarizing issues, and then we had to kind of work through that. And we did that in a public process. We had one RPC meeting in the basement of City of Sparks. We had Olive Garden And we just really went through each of these polarizing issues, and people from the public spoke. I mean, we really got around it. So we've been trying to keep everyone in the loop along the way. And then, of course, the Regional Plan Update Working Group meeting weekly or biweekly for over 2 years. So we were trying to engage. All right, so let's talk about some key overall changes to the plan. Number one, the plan structure and look. You can just tell by kind of looking at the cover, and that it's a different thing. It's not your standard government document. It's not all black and white. We've got some graphics going on in there, but so that's to engage folks. But actually, also the language within it is designed to be more approachable and understandable. And there's still some technical pieces in there, no doubt, but it's less so. We've included data analytics. So the scenario work, of course, there was 14 metrics we looked at there, but we're also building towards a data-driven annual report where we will take what's really happening on the ground as we track development through our region, and then be reporting that out as a dashboard on our website, and then as an annual report that we would deliver at some sort of event that we will host. Obviously, if we have that information, it can provide context to the master plan land use and project of regional significance decision-making process. That's the idea. And then I talked about cleaning up policies, eliminating redundancies, making the plan more implementable, and then the last bullet there is really key, embedding back to the regional planning requirements as described in the Nevada revised statutes. Some of what we're dealing with today in terms of our regional plan that we have right now is the result of a couple legal settlements that happened in the 2000s. I understand that why those things had to occur at that time, but it did veer us off of these pretty clear contents that are in 278.0274 that describe exactly what is supposed to be in the regional plan. And so we have tried to re-embed back into that. We're supposed to have population projection in the regional plan. Previously, we've been doing the consensus forecast. I bring that to you guys, and we check it against the identified sustainable water resources. Well, that's now built right into the regional plan, so you can find that information there. It's not in its own other document. Subsection 3, I believe, talks about limiting premature expansion. You could think of that as sprawl, if you want, and directing growth to established areas. It's also good to point out without destroying, maintaining neighborhood character as well. It's not just a tool to blow things up, but we want to try to optimize, right, and fill in the interstices of our area where we already have invested in infrastructure and we have capacity. And that leads to that next piece, efficient public facility and service provision. A couple of the subsections deal with how we should be doing our master plan land use decision-making in lockstep with public facility planning. Right now, we pretty much rely on something called concurrency management, which is a jurisdictional approach that says, we've got it handled, don't worry about it. At the time of building permit, we'll be serving this thing. And we totally agree, and that seems to be working out. However, it does put us in a really weird dark gray area when we're trying to propose a recommendation to our planning commission for an approval of whatever 1,000 units, subdivision that somebody's trying to propose out there. We want to make sure that we have at least some understanding of how that's going to impact existing public facility plans and maybe what new capacities are needed to serve it. Further, we need to conserve our natural resources. That's a big part of that. And we have a plan to move forward on that. We have bolstered the natural resources section of the plan, but we think there's more work to be done to achieve a map that is supposed to basically describe areas that are more or less suitable for development based on natural resource considerations like conservation and flooding and air quality and that like. So as part of a natural resources plan moving forward, we're going to take a deep look at that. And then finally, intergovernmental coordination. That's something that we've been doing, I think, a pretty good job of, and we'll continue to try to strengthen the whole regional collaboration vibe that way. Okay, so the plan itself, how is this thing constructed? It's 3 main chapters. And then in between each chapters are little things we're calling interludes. The first interlude is about a history of regional planning and a history of development in the region as well. The second one, called scenario metrics, in between chapters 2 and 3. You can see graphics of the actual measured impacts from the 4 scenarios. And then finally, we have one called moving forward that is all about the wider region and engaging in that bigger conversation. But the 3 substantive chapters are chapters 1, 2, and 3, and then we have some appendices. Chapter 1, setting the stage, really describes what are we? What is TMRP? Where do we come from? What are we supposed to do? And the NRS contents of the regional plan are contained there. And then what is this regional plan and how did we get there? So it tells the story that I'm kind of telling right now of how we got to the regional plan draft we have today. Chapter 2 describes the scenario planning work. It starts with these adopted regional goals that we presented to the Regional Planning Governing Board, shows how our scenario planning work evaluated the impacts there against those regional goals, and it ultimately led to something we're calling the Regional Form Map, which is a way that we're trying to direct growth and investment in a few different regional land designations or tiers in our community, and I'm going to show you guys that map. And then Chapter 3, this is the meaty policy chapter of the plan where you want to go in and see, what is TMRPA saying we have to do to be in conformance, right? We're down to 60 policies, 5 policy elements, and again, they match those 5 major concepts from NRS: population growth, regional form, the public facilities and services aspect, natural resources, and regional coordination. Okay, so we already talked about the consensus forecast being right in the plan. That's kind of cool. But what everyone is really talking about, and probably the biggest change, is this idea of tiering within the TMSA. So here's a map. The Truckee Meadows Services Area is the thick black line, that weird shape. Looks kind of like a chicken or something. I don't know. But that is the area within which, that was set previously in other regional plans, right? The area within which you would expect to find or be delivered municipal services in a 20-year time horizon. What we've found through the scenario work and through the housing study and the industrial land needs analysis and all the work we've done looking at the assessor parcel data and zoning and existing entitlements, that it's actually pretty capacious. It's got a lot of capacity. It's probably got closer to 40 years of capacity in it in terms of population growth and supporting that with residential, expansion of residences and building new homes and stuff, rather than 20 years. Because we were able to build 4 different ways, very different ways, that we could achieve a 20-year future, and there was still plenty of land left. Not to mention, there are areas like at City of Sparks, they call it the goalpost. I think up there in the northeast area, it's up a hill to some degree. There's certainly flat land in there. It's kind of a reserve area. It has very low density zoning today, like a GR, 1 unit per 40. But it could support more if we could figure out, how we want to deliver the services and facilities up there, and someone owns that, decides they want to try to intensify. So we have a lot of capacity in the existing TMSA, and we wanted to find out how can we try to optimize this public facilities piece. We didn't want to shrink or expand the TMSA because that was a battle that, frankly, we just kind of wanted to hold the line, was the take there. So instead, and this was coming out of that Portland State work and some of the work looking nationally, we approached the idea of tiering within the TMSA. So we have a total of 5 tiers now across our area of authority, which basically is the TMSA plus everything to the Oregon border, absent tribal lands, and the hydrographic Tahoe Basin, or TRPA is the authority. Let's start in the center. The very darkest blue area kind of runs up Virginia to downtown, UNR, and then over to Sparks, the mixed-use district. We're calling that the mixed-use core. That's the area where we want to see the highest density and intensity. It's focused, right? It's inside the McCarran Ring. It's where we have BRT service, transit, where we're working on the complete streets. We're doing the Virginia redo. RTC is doing it, rather. And so in that area, we actually have minimum density of 14 dwelling units per acre that we're trying to enforce. That's a relaxation of previous plans where it was at 18. So it's a little bit more permissive, and there's some exception language, but that's because you can't always get 18 dwelling units per acre, and we've seen that as we've been dealing with the existing regional plan, so it's an attempt to make it more implementable. This is where we want to see investment to support density and intensification. It's the #1 priority area. Then moving out of that to that next shade of blue is the Tier 1 area. There's no minimums and there's no maximums in that area. And there's no maximums in the dark blue either. But that's an area that we also want to see investment. It's a secondary priority. And it's an area where we do have infrastructure. We've got a bunch of homes. We've got jobs and businesses. It's a place where we want to see, building that jobs housing balance and building some intensity in there as well. Then we get to the light blue area, which is Tier 2. It's kind of a suburban land use type designation. And that's the area within which we have set a maximum dwelling units per acre of 30. So that's like a 3-story apartment complex, give or take, right? Fountain House down in the city of Sparks is 4 stories, and it's beyond 30. So at any rate, this is what we kind of agreed to. There is some exception language in there. If something comes in and it goes above 30, we can deal with that. But that's also something we need to be really clear about. Exceptions should be exceptions, not the rule. And so we're going to track, as part of our annual reporting, how many times exceptions are used, so we can say, hey, are you sure that this is the right rule, because we keep doing these exceptions, that kind of a thing. And then the biggest change really is the Tier 3, the gray area inside the TMSA. That's the area where we're trying to lock down the land use designation in terms of its master plan land use at its existing state. So if you're currently in a very low density land use type, that's what you've got. Until you want to initiate some sort of master plan land use change, you will have to actually do a regional plan amendment to change the boundaries on this map. So that's the biggest regulatory change where we have not taken anything away from everyone. There's a policy RF4 in the plan. Everything that exists today, master plan land use, entitlements, zoning, it's all grandfathered in where it stands right now, period. But moving forward after adoption, if you want to change and intensify, let's say you're in that gray area, somewhere down in southwest Washoe County unincorporated area, and you want to build some apartments, right? And today you're zoned for, or you have a master plan land use designation that allows, 2 dwelling units per acre or whatever it happens to be. You would need to come through the Washoe County process to do the master plan land use changing, and then ultimately you'd have to come and do an RPC hearing and an RPGB hearing to change the map to allow for it. We want to get in early. As soon as any jurisdictional staff identify that this process would be in place, we want to be in at the beginning to make sure that all the steps that need to happen will be happening. So it's not like you go through and spend a bunch of money and you get to the end and then regional planning says, nah. By the way, regional planning has said no one time in the 8 to 9 years that I've worked there. And it was for a good reason, but it could become more common based on these links we're trying to put in, where we're trying to link master plan land use decision-making with public facility and infrastructure provisioning. That's the system. Again, nothing's taken away, and there always is a process. There's criteria laid out in here in the regional forum policies to move from tier to tier. So you can go from outside the TMSA, which we're calling the rural area, that's the 5th tier really, which is super low density. You can move into the TMSA. There's a process, but you have to prove up. And it's going to be asking for some specific criteria. And those criteria are this kind of stuff. Proximity to the requested tier. What's the housing mix potential? Can you connect into the transportation opportunities? What about this last bullet? Availability and adequacy of public facilities and services. Right? That's crucial. We don't want to keep entitling land for units that we don't know how to serve so that we can avoid building what I've been hearing lately are called zombie projects. Right, where these things just languish out there because they don't make any sense. We want to have the context at the time we make the decision to say, yes, this is a good idea. We should build housing units here, or we should put industrial over here, or whatever it is. So that's kind of the idea behind the regional forum and regional tiering that we did. To do that, we need to do a little better job of not just relying on concurrency management, but actually understanding a little bit more about the how. How will these things be served? And so we've replaced the concurrency management system policies with a list of standards that are available in the public facilities element. I'll go ahead and show you that real quick here. It's totally unreadable, but on this slide. But basically, it's these 5 areas: water, wastewater, transportation, and schools. Let's take water, because here we are at the Northern Nevada Water Planning Commission. So standards inside the TMSA, what are we going to be looking for? Water conveyance facilities are available and adequate. Okay, that's great. That seems like go for it. Or they're planned for within a 10-year time frame in a facilities plan. So that we know that there's something already being considered to serve an area. Or finally, if not, then required to be constructed by new development per the local government master plan. So if you put it on the developer, that's a path forward as well, which is a pretty traditional path forward in this region. If you can't meet that standard, that doesn't mean it's an automatic no or anything. We look at all of this stuff in context. So on the right there's a paragraph underneath this table that says, okay, you can't meet these standards right now because nobody thought this was going to happen. This is my brand new vision for the future, right? Okay, fine. Come in and tell us what capacity, feasibility, right? What capacity improvements are needed? How is it going to be funded? Because that's a huge sticking point between jurisdictions. And how will it affect existing planning in place already? So those 3 things would have to be shown in a feasibility report. And so that's what the kind of information we're looking for in terms of the standards, right, beyond the concurrency management system. Now, just back up one. We had this idea to do something called a Public Infrastructure Investment Plan. We're calling it the PIP for short. This is where we're not looking to necessarily guide exactly where we think we should invest things. We want to work together with everyone that's actually doing that work at TUMWA, at the local jurisdictions in public works, at the airport authority, the RTC. What work is already out there? We want to centralize it and put it together and understand where it aligns, where we have mismatches, and use that as context to improve even how we would do this master plan land use decision-making. We think that's going to take time and your help, obviously, because we can't do it alone, or we probably would have already tried to do it. So we're going to work together, right? This is that regional coordination piece we do to try to bring that information together and centralize it. We think that will probably take between now and the next plan update, which is a 5-year cycle. So it's not like we're going to run out there and start commanding, we will put infrastructure here. But we want to work together to understand what are we planning for and how does it all align. And then I think that will absolutely help us refine those regional land designations in the regional form map to be less about jurisdictional boundaries and more about how we're planning to serve the development in the future. So hopefully you guys will be willing to help me on that. You can see here that it addresses some of the subsection in our NRS that the contents of the regional plan ought to contain. And it's really a coordination effort, and again, by the next update. I talked about the annual report, basically providing more context so we understand what direction we're moving in. If we're seeing that, we're only building multifamily, and we've built a ton of it, and we're tracking that, and then someone comes in to do multifamily in one of those tier 3 areas, maybe that's the context we need to say, maybe that's not a good idea right now. Maybe we need something else there based on the housing mix. That's just a hypothetical. Finally, the natural resources plan, I mentioned it briefly, but kind of like the PIP, looking to coordinate all the good work that's already been done and is in the process here. We're working on some stuff. Obviously, Washoe County and other entities have done a ton of work. So we want to bring that together so that we can really achieve the NRS requirement that we create that map that talks about suitability for development. We're also thinking that's probably going to take some time, hopefully before the next update, but you know how these things go. So, all right, those are the main crux changes. Otherwise, it's basically master planning as we've been dealing with it. We've been trying to get the word out, especially this last month. We held 11 meetings in the public since August 28th to try to get public feedback and to make sure everyone's aware that this thing is happening. That doesn't include private meetings that we've done, like going to the builders, going to the realtors, whoever will listen. So here I am. Moving to this moment, last week the Regional Planning Commission unanimously recommended the adoption of the plan to the Regional Planning Governing Board. So next Thursday at 2 p.m. right here in this room, we will get to hear whether or not we're going to take that step then, or it could turn around at that point. It's basically up to the deciders. I'm not the decider, right? But I'm sure hopeful because I really want a haircut. And so then that would be, right, the adoption. That would be the first time we could potentially adopt the regional plan. If it doesn't happen, it would go back down to the RPC based on the changes that the RPGB suggests and then come back up to the RPGB. We can't take this beyond this year, right? This was supposed to be a 2017 update, and here we are at the end of 2019. So we're trying to cross the finish line, and I think we're really close. So with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions or comments you guys might have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there any questions from the commission? Yes.
I think so. Yeah, good job, Jeremy. Thank you.
The process and the plan very well. That was very understanding to me. Now, the question I have relates to the natural resources part of the plan. That appears to be last on the list, and it sounds like that may be done hopefully by the next update in 5 years or beyond. That may be good enough for part of the county and part of the area, but for the northern valleys, putting the natural resources as a last item of concern appears to be just not acceptable. The natural resources, the northern valleys are being developed as we speak extremely rapidly. There's more projects coming in on a daily basis. There has been huge problems occurring I just heard yesterday that 3 domestic well owners had to go on an emergency arsenic removal system because the arsenic in the well went up to 83 here in the last 2 years. I'm noticed that one of the studies being done in the Red Rock area by Tumwa, where they're doing an artificial recharge investigation. They have pumped millions of gallons of essentially Truckee River water into the aquifer at a almost no arsenic, and then the water that was pumped out had about 7 times as much arsenic and almost went over the standard. These North Valleys are very, very sensitive, and how do we get the natural resource planning into the plan in time before the valleys are completely developed? We have flooding, we have pending flooding, the valleys are still under flood, and the building is still going on. There is water flowing down the creeks during minor rainstorms, such as we had the other day, that otherwise wouldn't be flowing. It's flowing because of the increased impervious area. The small rainstorms like we had the other day didn't normally produce runoff into the closed basins, but now we're getting it. So I don't know what should be done, but something should be done faster than later, is a comment I think should go to the governing board, because maybe there needs to be a speed up of that part of the plan in the North Valleys in particular.
Thank you. If I could just address that, I think that's absolutely great comment. Maybe I mischaracterized it a little bit. The Natural Resources Plan and the Public Infrastructure Investment Plan will be occurring concurrently. And so it's not like we're going to hold back on trying to get that work going. Further, we do have what are called development constraints areas. They're strict constraints. Those are carried over into the plan as the new draft. And so if you're in a floodway, playa, wetland, slopes, steep slopes, federal lands, highly discouraged. I mean, I would say can't build there, but I'm not the final say on everything. But further, in fact, the natural resources element is the element that we bolstered the most in terms of policies. So we weren't able to get to where we wanted to be to make that map. But when we did that policy evaluation and development section, we were able to coalesce and collapse and remove a lot of policies in like the regional forum section and even some of the public facility stuff and the coordination section. But if you look at kind of some of our crosswalk info, we went from very few natural resource policies to more natural resources policies. So we have been doing as much as we felt confident that we could do in the short term, and we're not trying to put it on the back burner. We're going to run that concurrently, and I think that actually we'll be able to get the natural resources component and influencing policy amendments prior to the infrastructure piece. But I think your comments are duly noted and good, and
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
Not so much a question, but certainly a comment. I think, all jurisdictions have really come together with this plan and put a lot of time and effort, and I appreciate the outreach that you provided to, the community, trying to drum up that information. One of those things, we struggle with this a lot, and, 3,500 people in our region commenting on this plan seems pretty low to me, but I know you will take what you can get, and we do the same thing. So I really appreciate your time and effort with this.
Thanks, David.
Anything to add, Mr. Smitherin?
I will comment. the aspect of the public infrastructure investment plan, PIP, okay, for short. Jeremy and I have talked about that at some length, and I committed that I would work for or work along with them in developing that over the next 5 years or so until the next plan update.
Sooner is better.
Yeah,
to
that's
your
right.
point, but yeah.
I believe so. So it's something that that'll be on the horizon as far as the next update of the regional water plan, because it needs to be in conformance, and that will be one of the elements I think that we're looking to have as much in common as we can in our plan and in that document.
Any further questions or comments from the commission? Well, the staff recommends accepting the report. So entertain a motion to accept the report.
I'll move that we approve the report.
I've got a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, next item on the agenda, item number 6, is the report by the Desert Research Institute on last winter's cloud seeding operations for the Truckee River and Lake Tahoe basins. Possible direction to staff, Chris Wessel, Frank McDonough.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, we've been funding cloud seeding for probably the last 10 years, and we have, last year we funded it in the amount of $50,000. And Frank McDonough is here from DRI to give us a report on how last year's cloud seeding went and what they're looking forward to here in the future. So that'll turn over to Mr. McDonough.
Okay, thank you for having me, and good afternoon. So I'm going to give a summary of what happened this past winter and then give you a little overview of what we're doing this next winter. So as you probably already know, last winter was a kind of an interesting winter. We started out, so here's a plot that shows the median snowpack increases by month on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side shows what happened this past winter. And so you can see that we started out a little above average in November. December was below average, and at the end of December, we were actually below average where we would hope to be for the winter. Then we picked up some ground in January, and by the end of January, we're a little bit ahead of where we needed to be, maybe just a couple percent. And then February came along, and we got crushed in February with a bunch of big storms. And by the end of February, we are actually almost 160% of a normal snowpack. And then March actually overperformed as well. And so by the end of the winter, the Tahoe Basin had 185% of normal snowpack, which is good news for our water supply. And I don't think we had any flooding either, which was good news as well. And another thing I want to point out here real quick is that we include April in here. And what's interesting is April doesn't really seem to add much to the snowpack. So any snow we get in April probably just maybe maintains the snowpack a little longer, but we don't really see any increases in April snowpack just on average. So moving on to cloud seeding in general. So in water year 2019, the state of Nevada funded a project. These shaded areas are where the project was taking place. And we had the Tahoe Truckee project. We had a Carson Walker aircraft project. There was a project targeting the high country down in the Spring Mountains down in southern Nevada. And then in the Humboldt, we had the Rubies and Santa Rosa Mountain projects. So all 6 of these projects were active during this past winter. So I'm going to focus more on what happened with the Tahoe Truckee project, and feel free to ask any questions later about the other projects if you want. So this project was primarily funded by the state of Nevada, but it was also supported locally by the Western Regional Water Commission. And that allowed us to put out a full project with all of our equipment that we've run over the years. And this is a shot of a cloud seeding generator, just for your knowledge what one of these things looks like. So this one's out in the Ruby Mountains. So for Tahoe Truckee project, we had our usual 5 sites hosting 7 cloud seeding generators. There's the spot. We have 3 of them along the Sierra Crest, and then a little bit further west, we have 2 more. We actually have 3 generators at 2 sites, and the goal of those is to land snow on the west slopes of the Sierra Crest. So we're targeting the Carson Range and also the east slopes of the Sierra Crest. That's our target area, and that's been that way for quite a while. So here's what happened during the project. During October, we went out and visited all the generators. They were all filled with 100 gallons of silver iodide seeding solution, and to fill one of those guys up is $10K per tank. So that's $70K right off the top just to fill the things up. We got the generators operational and tested them, and then we put the Barker Pass generators back out in the Forest Service land per our U.S. Forest Service permit. And we visited all the precip gauges that have actually been put in place by the Western Regional Water Commission. We have 8 precip gauges around Tahoe now that we have 2 to 3 years of data with those things as well, which is great. And then on November 1, we began the project. We do 24/7 operations, and we maintain our equipment. So we're trying to hit every storm that comes through that's seedable. We're trying to add some extra snow. And so you can see what we do we put out a daily forecast discussion, which if you want, you can be on our forecast discussions. And then we test our equipment weekly. I have field maintenance guys that actually go out and repair equipment. They're pretty hardcore guys that go way out in the backcountry and keep this stuff running. And then when the storms come in and they look good, we actually run the generators. So we did that pretty much November 1 through Feb 15th. And then on February 15th, the snowpack reached 150% of median for the date, which we have a built-in suspension criteria for that. So pretty much if the snowpack ever exceeds 150% of normal for the date, we stop operations. And so we shut down the project temporarily on Feb 15th. And then, because sometimes we'll get like a big storm, we'll pop above 150, then we go back down if we don't get any more snow. So we keep the project going. So we kept going, but pretty much, as you saw in February, there wasn't any reprieve, and for the rest of the winter, we were above 150% of normal. And then after the winter, we go through and analyze the data and figure out how we did and what happened. So here's the project summary. We had 18 seeding events over the course of the winter prior to Feb 15th, and we ran the generators for 530 total hours. That created on approximately 10,000 acre-feet of SWE in the snowpack. And the estimated cost benefit for that, I estimate the cost for the project last year was about $140K, with the state picking up some of the money. It was a little tricky to get that number because we were forecasting for all 6 sites for the same forecaster. So it's a little hard to decide how much the forecasting services cost. But I estimate that it costs about $13.90 per acre foot. And I want to point out too that we still have seeding solution left over since we had the suspension, we still have seeding solution left from the last year's project. So that number actually would be lower because we would have generated more snow and we would have for the same cost. So anyway, that's the estimated cost benefit for this past winter. So after the winter's over, we go back and look at how we did relative to what's a favorable cloud seeding. So cloud seeding, favorable conditions are winds that will deliver cloud seeding aerosols into the clouds over the area we want to increase snowpack. The temperatures in the cloud have to be correct, and then we need clouds with sub-freezing water drops in them. And I'm not going to get into that too much, but here's an image of what sub-freezing water drops in clouds would look like on a pole up at the top of Alpine Meadows. And if you look at that right-hand inset on the bottom panel compared to the left hand, you can see all that white, foamy looking stuff, that's rime ice, and that's telling you that that cloud had water drops in it and is seedable. So how do we know how we did? Well, typically we do a target control analysis. And so these C letters are SNOTEL sites. These put out hourly snowfall data, and the T are the target. So we hope to increase snowpack in the target area relative to the control area. And historically, this is the area, the C's where we're not, our generators, I didn't think were hitting, but after doing some work that I'm going to show you in a second, I'm starting to think that maybe the Donner Summit Snow Lab is getting hit on occasion by a little bit of seeding. So I'm not 100% sure that the Donner Summit, the one with the black circle, is actually a legitimate control target, but Echo, Peak, and the Hagen Meadows, the two on the south, certainly are. So how did we look by the Feb 15th? Well, here's the percent of snowpack at these SNOTEL sites on the suspension day. And you can see that the two southern sites are a little bit less than the target sites. You can see the Truckee site at 6,500 feet actually was almost 200% of normal, and over in Big Meadow, 188, and up on Mount Rose, 150% of normal. And you can see that Donner one's got 168, but then down on the southern end, we have about 25% less snow, which gives us some confidence that we actually increased the snowpack in the target area. The precip gauge network, I was hoping to give you guys some data on that, but I have some QC issues that I've been struggling with. I'm collecting a good data set, but I'm getting some weird answers with the freak. So basically, we have 4 GNOR gauges, which are 15-minute updates, and then we have 4 old-style gauges that are just kind of catch snow, and then they have a transducer. And so we're getting some diurnal noise in those things, which is I think the sun's hitting them, and we're seeing a little bit of expansion. So we're getting this weird up and down every day. So I need to subtract off the noise out of the data set. But I'm going to present a report, and I'll mail it to Chris and Jim, and they can pass it on to you guys once we get the precip gauge data figured out. So what are we doing next year? So we had a research study funded by the Pennington Foundation to study the snowpack in the Little Truckee Basin and actually to see if it could be seeded. And so to do that work, we developed a numerical model. This is just showing the way these numerical weather models work is we can scope in. So over the target area, which is that inner box, we have horizontal resolution at 1 kilometer. So we actually have 50 vertical levels in the atmosphere every 1 kilometer. And we can do all kinds of great analysis with that kind of data set. So this project allowed us to go in and do some real research, which we have wanted to do for a while. And so we looked at the storm structures, the potential cloud seeding opportunities with this weather model, and here's some of the types of images we can create. And if you look on that that it's kind of hard to see, but this is a cross-section from near Pyramid Lake down to the coast near Santa Cruz. And the upper left panel is what the numerical model says is an ice crystal cloud, and on the right-hand upper is where the model thinks there's liquid water, and then those boxes there showing where that water's below freezing. So that would be a seedable cloud for us to have. And so we have data every 15 minutes for 5 storms, so it covers probably about 100 to 200 hours of storms, and we can analyze this data and figure out how these storms move through, what the temperatures are, how the clouds differentiate ice and liquid, and come up with a potential seedability for clouds. And so we did that over the Little Truckee this past winter, and then once we had the number of hours we could seed, we started to test locations where we could actually successfully seed the Little Truckee. And if you look, it's kind of hard to see, but if you look up on the top of that plot, just to the left of that red circle, there's 2 generators, one at Cisco and one at Troy, and those two actually turned out to be some real favorable spots to try to seed the little Truckee. And so we identified sites for those, and we've actually put 2 generators up there, and we're going to actually do an operational cloud seeding project, primarily targeting the upper Truckee. But in the meantime, we also release particles from our existing generator network, and they're the other 4. I didn't run echo for this study, but we will add echo to those. And so what you can see is, you can see where the station is, and then you can see the cloud seeding plume being released. And if the cloud seeding plume turns blue, that means it's successfully in clouds that can be seeded. And you can also see where the seeding material's going as well. And so this gives us good evidence of where we're seeding, how well we're doing, how many hours we can seed. And then this plot down on the bottom is a way to tell how well each generator's doing at each cloud, at each seeding. So for this one case, we just turned the generator on in the model for the beginning of the storm, and this orange shaded area shows how many aerosols or cloud seeding aerosols are making it into the target. And so this gives us great evidence. We're actually going to do this over the rest of the basin, just since we have all the data. But so far, we were focusing primarily on the upper Truckee, since that's the funding source for this project. A second thing that I want to point out to you guys, and hopefully I'm not getting too much into the weeds here, but so this plot here shows the precipitation at 2 sites on the Sierra versus the precipitation in Sacramento. And if you look at the x-axis along the bottom, that's the year, and the y-axis is the ratio of precipitation. So the black line is at Pacific House, which is about halfway up the Sierra, and the dashed line is on the Sierra crest. And what I want to point out is, if you look, that line's actually getting less. So what that's telling you is that if you look at the total precipitation along especially at Pacific House, but also all that along the Sierra crest, and you look at that compared to the amount of precipitation that's falling in Sacramento, you can see we're actually losing precipitation relative to Sacramento. And the Sacramento precipitation isn't increasing. So what we're really seeing is that there's less precip falling over the Sierra than there used to be. And there's some thoughts on what's causing that. We believe it's probably air pollution from the Bay Area, and it's dust from the Central Valley getting into our clouds. And so we're seeing a decrease in precipitation. And so part of our study with the little Truckee is to fly this UAV and actually go up and measure aerosols. And we're trying to get an idea. They call this inadvertent cloud seeding. This is when clouds are seeded, but not by purposefully. And this happens all the time. There's thoughts that we're losing more than 1 million acre feet over the Colorado River Basin just from air pollution. And so this is a real issue, inadvertent cloud seeding. And so, what I do is trying to purposefully increase precipitation, but all of us are acting to decrease precipitation. So we're going to study this a little more this winter as well. So as far as operational projects, like I said, we have an operational project targeting the little Truckee. So we've got 24/7 forecasting for the whole winter. Going to primarily focus on hitting the little Truckee. We got all kinds of stuff out in the basin. We're going to go out and regularly do snowmobile loops and measure snow, and we're going to try to piggyback off some of the TUMWA data that you guys have and see if we can take advantage of some of the measurements you already have in the field. And I'll be in touch with you guys about that. So we're going to do that. But like I said, we had solution left over from the state project. So we're going to also run we're going to actually run all of the generators for the have we been using over the Truckee. We got 3 of them full. The other 2 are about half full. So we're going to pretty much, as we go through the forecast, we're going to hit the little Truckee. But if the winds push it over to Tahoe Basin and the old locations of the project, we'll run the generators as well. So we're going to do a Tahoe project just like we've done for all these past years, and we're just going to piggyback it off the time that we're forecasting for Pennington and for the using the solution from last year. So all the permits have been updated. We're going to be grandfathered in. The Tahoe Truckee project is grandfathered in for your background info with the state of California. And as long as we keep the project going, we don't have to worry about putting out an EA or anything like that, which if we wanted to restart the project after a couple-year outage, we'd probably have to reapply with California and go through the environmental impact activity. So anyway, we'll have a project, same as usual. Should have a good year. I can come back next year and tell you about how the project turned out, and I'll plan to give you guys a hard copy report of the precip gauge analysis as soon as I have it done. So I'd be glad to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. McDonough. Are there any questions from the commission? Yes.
Did you get funding beyond this winter?
We just have this winter, so. Yeah, the state program was not renewed by the legislature this last session, so we got 1 year. We'll see what happens next year. So I think that modeling study, though, has given us a lot of good data to actually go maybe specifically hit some of these ski areas. I think that's my hope, is we can bring them on board. I've been saying that for years, but I think with showing that we actually physically have evidence that we're hitting them will give some good ammo for that.
Mr. DiMartini?
Yes, thanks. I've always been in support of the class because it focuses the effort on increasing snowpack, which may be changing. But I have a question, maybe incorrect, but had to do some math in my mind as you were speaking regarding the benefit-cost ratio. And what I came up with was roughly $3 per 1,000 gallons. But I might have misheard the numbers. I believe you mentioned
$3 per 1,000 gallons.
you had $1,300 or $1,600 per acre foot. And so using that, I came up with around $3 or so per 1,000 gallons, just mentally. And
Well, so
that would sound very high, so
that doesn't. I can't do the math in my head, but that doesn't. How many gallons are in an acre foot?
325,850.
And so if that costs $13 to make, that's
Oh, it's $13 instead of 1,300?
yes, $13
Okay,
per acre.
so I did mishear you, sorry.
Yeah,
It's-
I wouldn't do the project. if I thought-
Yes, so that brings it down to .03, so that's much more realistic. It's my mistake, sorry.
No worries.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Haupt.
I think the commission would be really interested in hearing more about your findings regarding trends in precipitation, because that's really interesting. A lot of the climate models that I've seen and some of the research I've seen are actually pointing to a wetter future due to climate change down the road.
Well, there might be
With
more
more
storms,
variability
so-
and volatility, but
the storms moving in. The problem with the climate models is that they don't get into the minutia of the aerosol, liquid water, ice phase interaction. So warmer clouds aren't as efficient producing ice. So the climate models are good to a point, but we'll see. We'll see. We'll stand here in 20 years and see.
yeah, it'll be very interesting to.
Yeah, but we'll talk more about the aerosol stuff. I think that's really interesting, and that's just the trends, and so there is thoughts that, if there's more storms and where they're not as efficient, then maybe it'll be a wash in the end. But we certainly are seeing and I don't know if you guys care to hear this, but I'll say it anyway. The air pollution makes clouds less able to produce larger droplets. So the clouds come over, they're full of small droplet. The droplets don't collide. They don't make ice as easily. And then as they come down the west or the east slope, everything evaporates. So we still get the storm come in, but it's not quite as efficient. So we're going to try to measure the aerosols up in the little Truckee, both before and after storms. And we can also use that plume model to actually release the particles from the Bay Area urban centers and see if they're actually landing here versus up in the Yuba or wherever. So we'll get a better understanding of at least the transport. So.
And then I just had one more question. In one of your earlier slides, the cost benefit, you showed that the water produced from cloud seeding is equivalent to water for 24,000 Tumwa customers if it makes it back to the river. How much water, how much of that snowpack runoff makes it back to the Truckee River?
It probably depends on the year. If it's a wet year, probably quite a bit does. If it's a drier year, probably get more infiltration into the soil or more sublimation down to dirt. So I think it is year to year. There's some long-lived projects in the Southern Sierra. There's a project, the Southern California Edison project on the Upper San Joaquin, which is a hydro project down. It's just south of Yosemite. So you got the Merced River. As you go south, you got the Merced, the Upper San Joaquin, and then the Kings. And the Kings and the Merced have been seeded on and off or the Merced's never been seeded. The San Joaquin has been seeded pretty much on continuously since the late 50s. And then the King has a bunch of years unseeded. And so they've done studies comparing those three rivers. And the years that this Upper San Joaquin seeded, there's 5% more water in the river itself. And so, and that's got the 95% confidence interval on it as well for the statisticians. So there's pretty good evidence that at least for that long-lived project that there's about 5% more water on a seeded year in the Upper San Joaquin River. So I don't see any reason why this area wouldn't. I haven't come up with a great way to measure it here yet, but yeah, I'd say 5% is a reasonable guess. So let's knock that down to 12,000 houses.
Are there any other questions of the commission? Mr. Wessel, you have anything more to add? Well, the staff is recommending the commission accept the report on last winter's cloud seeding operations for the Truckee River and Lake Tahoe basins.
I'll go ahead and move to accept the report.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to accept the report. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda, item number 7 is a report on the American Flat hydrogeologic investigation by the Truckee Meadows Water Authority and possible direction of staff. Greg Pohl, hydrogeologist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greg Pohl, I'm a hydrogeologist with Truckee Meadows Water Authority. So today I'm going to talk to you about a hydrogeologic characterization project we just completed at American Flat. Let's see if I can get this to go. I just wanted to point out first, though, that this is part of a larger project known as the One Water Nevada project. So there are actually 3 sites where characterization is currently underway. First is Bedell Flat, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that from Christian Croft in a few minutes. And there's also some characterization work going on at the Reno Stead Water Reclamation Facility. And then I'm going to talk today about the American Flat project. So what was done at this project to characterize the subsurface? We conducted a seismic survey to help us better understand the geology. We also constructed 3 wells. One was primarily for an injection well, and then adjacent to that were 2 monitoring wells. And then an aquifer test was done on the injection well, and then an extended duration recharge or injection test was done. And then we did water quality sampling both prior to the test, during the test, and then after the test, and then used that water quality data to understand the compatibility of the injectate versus the local groundwater. And then lastly, we did a modeling evaluation to understand how much water could be injected at the site over a long period of time. So let's go through each of these briefly and see what we learned. The first is the seismic survey. Basically, 4 seismic transects were conducted in an east-west fashion, as shown in the figure on the left. The pink outline is the county parcel that we call the American Flat site. And at each of these transects, high-energy seismic waves were introduced at the surface, and from that you can infer the depth to bedrock and also structural features such as faults. And from that information, we were able to determine that, and also combining with some regional data, that the thickness of the alluvium, or the depth to bedrock, is on the order of 250 to over 1,700 feet. So that is positive in terms of the ability to inject water, because these alluvial sediments are typically highly permeable. In terms of structural controls, we didn't find a lot of faults at the county site itself, but there are other faults, particularly the airport fault, which is located just to the east of the site. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. As I said earlier, we installed 3 new wells. These wells were located approximately 100 feet apart. The injection well was located upgradient or to the north, and each well was drilled to a depth of about 700 feet. The screen depth was approximately 200 feet below land surface, all the way to the bottom of the well at about 700 feet. And this allowed us to inject water, again, at that upgradient well, and then monitor the groundwater levels at the downgradient wells. The photo on the left is a picture from the injection well looking roughly to the south, and you can see just barely the 2 monitoring wells located 100 and then 200 feet down gradient. Okay, next, after the wells were drilled, we conducted an aquifer test. This allows us to understand what the permeability is of the sediments at the test site. So we pumped, in this case, 560 gallons per minute for 24 hours, and then monitored water levels in the injection well and then the 2 monitoring wells. The figure on the right shows the results in terms of the drawdown, or the water level declines during the pumping test. And what it shows is, on the x-axis we have the time, on the y-axis we have drawdown. The red or orangish line on the top shows the drawdown in the pumping well, so it's on the order of 50 or 60 feet after 24 hours, whereas the drawdown in the 2 monitoring wells was about 10 to 20 feet, a little bit less, as you would expect. But more importantly, we were able to use this information to quantify the hydraulic conductivity, or the permeability of the aquifer, and found that it has a hydraulic conductivity of about 6 feet per day. What that means is it's a really good site for injection of any type of fluid, basically. Okay, after the aquifer test, then we conducted a long-term, about a 4-month injection test, where we injected 472 gallons per minute and monitored, again, water levels, groundwater levels at the injection well and then at the 2 monitoring wells. So the plot on the right shows on the x-axis the date, and then on the y-axis the depth to water, showing how the water levels changed over time. So basically, as we're injecting nearly 500 gallons per minute, the water levels rose approximately 60 feet in the injection well, 25 feet in the closest monitoring well 1, and then 20 feet in the furthest monitoring well. And this tells us that we can easily inject 500 gallons per minute or so. And more importantly, at this injection rate, the groundwater levels don't come anywhere near land surface. The nearest water table position was more than 80 feet below land surface after injection of nearly 4 months. One thing, an additional measurement we made was measuring water levels regionally, and what we wanted to know is, how does the airport fault constrict or impede flow across it? As you know, there are flooding concerns in Swan Lake right now, so we wanted to make sure that any injection we're doing on the west side of the valley, we're not going to cause any problems on the east side of the valley. So we monitored water levels in this AFD well, that's the little blue dot, which is located just to the east of Swan Lake, but it is on the east side of the airport fault. That is that kind of brown line running essentially in a north-south direction. It's been known for decades that this is a barrier to groundwater flow, but we just wanted to make sure through our testing. So during the test, we monitor the groundwater levels, and that is what's shown on the figure on the left here. So on the x-axis, we have the date, and then on the y-axis, we have groundwater levels. And it's important to look at that y-axis because the demarcation or the increments in water levels, each increment is only 1/10 of a foot. So the changes are very, very small. So, and then I've outlined through the arrows there the injection, the 4-month injection period. So basically, what we saw is actually water levels decreased a little bit when we were injecting water. But if you look very closely, I think most of these fluctuations, they're somewhat random. They're basically just due to noise in the transducer itself, due to temperature changes and things like that. So we can very clearly determine that there were no significant influences from the injection on the west side of the valley to the east side of the valley. Also, we collected a number of water quality samples, again, both prior to the test, during the test, and after the test. We collected water quality samples both in the injectate, the fluid that was being injected in the ground, and then also in the local groundwater. What we found from all of these samples is that both for regulated and unregulated constituents, all of the samples were within water quality standards or published guidance levels. Secondly, these data were used to make speciation calculations. This basically determines if the injectate water might be incompatible with the local groundwater. The speciation calculations determine that we can inject either standard Truckee River water or A+ water, which might be planned for the site, and there should not be any mineral precipitation occurring at the site, which is a good thing. Okay, and then lastly, we conducted a pretty thorough groundwater modeling analysis, and again, the purpose of this was to determine how much fluid could be injected over a long period of time. We ran a number of simulations, gradually increasing the injection rate, and found that we could inject up to 2 million gallons per day, which is equivalent to about 2,200 acre-feet per year. But this could only occur if we were to pump roughly an equal amount of water out of the aquifer. If you look at the figure on the right, Tumwa has 3 production wells there shown with the blue dots, and we have the demand in the area to pump nearly that amount. But the key is we have to pump nearly what we inject to make sure we don't yield any unacceptably shallow groundwater conditions. Secondly, the modeling, specifically transport modeling, was done to see how far A+ water would migrate in the aquifer. The figure on the right shows the migration distance after about 50 years of injection of about 2 million gallons per day. And what we determined was at that rate, we would not see any of that A+ water encroaching upon either domestic wells or Tumwa production wells. And the threshold would be in the amount of 20, you wouldn't see a mixing ratio of about 25% or more in those down gradient wells. So that's what is shown in the plot here. The red or warmer colors represent relative concentrations of A+ water of greater than 75%. The yellow is greater than 50%, and the blue is greater than 25%. So that means, like, for example, if you're in the blue area, that water would be roughly 25% A+ water and 75% local groundwater. But in any event, under these conditions, under these injection rates, we wouldn't see a significant encroachment of this A+ water on these domestic wells or down gradient production wells. So that's all I have in terms of the overview of the project. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from the commission? Yes.
You have a question first, John? Yeah, thank you for the report. Is my microphone on? I guess. Couple, I guess, observations I have, and you can tell me if I'm incorrect, and I have some questions as well. But one of the observations is that this study is a very, very narrow-focused study. It's essentially a recharge and recovery study, and it's not a basin-wide study regarding the overall effects that may happen with regards to domestic wells, flooding, and other situations in the valley. And I think we are short on having that overall study to look at those things. But with regards to this study, in light of the domestic wells I talked about that went over 80 in arsenic recently and had to go to whole house systems, they were not in this valley, but there are domestic wells in this valley that are experiencing arsenic issues. There's a public utility private water system in the Silver Knolls area that has wells that have gone over the standard for arsenic. And with regards to your report on page 58, it is showing that the water being pumped in has a arsenic concentration of 1.56, which is relatively pristine water, and yet the water coming out had a arsenic concentration of 7.4, which is many times larger. So with mixing that would be happening in the aquifer, there's a suggestion that the arsenic level in the aquifer is extremely high to cause that the arsenic to increase so much in the water that's going in. So I think there's a lot more studies that need to be done with regards to the total basin, with regards to how this pumping of millions of gallons a day into these very deep aquifers, how that might move around these likely concentrations of arsenic that are down at those deeper levels. And so I think at this level, I wouldn't be in a position to support moving forward with without a lot more additional studies than this focused approach.
Thank you. That was a good question. Let me try to answer the arsenic question first. We noted a few concentrations from the samples that we collected. The 7.4 parts per billion number that you referred to, that was a number in the groundwater prior to the test. After the test was conducted, we also collected a sample. That number went down from 7.4 parts per billion to 5.95, so about 6. So it actually went down a little bit. That's to be expected because the injection water was running about 1 to 2 parts per billion. So yes, the arsenic concentrations of the local groundwater are higher than the Truckee River. We do know that. But injection of this fluid, at least in this particular case, caused the arsenic concentrations to go down. So that's the answer to your first question. With regard to whether or not this study addresses a more regional issue, I would say that this particular characterization effort was definitely focused on the American Flat site itself. But at TOMO, we are also doing a number of other studies, including a regional groundwater modeling study, and that we use this modeling tool to help us understand how injection at the site would impact the regional system. So we've done a lot of work to incorporate significant amount of regional data to develop this groundwater model, and then we're using this model to help better understand the system. So I think we've come a long way. We've developed numerous models over the last 2 or 3 decades, and I think the model we're using now is quite sophisticated and a very good tool.
Yeah, that's helpful, I didn't see that data in the report, but thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, I should clarify, there's actually a separate report for the modeling study, the more regional study.
I see.
But we were just reporting primarily on the American flat characterization itself today.
Okay, thank you. A couple more questions I have that relates to this is in light of the flooding situations that seem to be not well understood yet in these valleys and the sensitivity that exists, the aquifer storage and recovery operations typically lend themselves to pumping in water during the winter time, mostly. And I know this one might be a little bit different because one's trying to keep the water flowing in that Fish Springs pipeline. But pumping water in the winter and then taking it back out in the summer can certainly put some stresses on the flood situation. I understand that overall, if you take out as much as you put in, then the average status quo may be not affected, but there's the issue of the winter to the summer and how that additional application might affect potential infiltration into the groundwater during the winter. And again, I'm concerned about the movements of these underground waters, knowing that out in Cold Springs, there's some domestic wells that recently went to 83 micrograms of arsenic. One has to be concerned about how this aquifer storage and recovery may move waters around. And again, I think it would be a lot larger study than just focusing on one little spot at that American flat.
Good questions again. Speaking with regard to the flooding issue, I will say that again, the airport fault is known to be a barrier to flow. So I don't believe that any injection that would occur at American Flat or pretty much anywhere on the west hydrographic basin would have any impact on the east side, so in relation to Swan Lake. Now, in relation, or on the west side, your question was, if you were to inject in the winter, would that cause problems, perhaps if you weren't going to pump it until the summer? I would say that if you were to inject at this site, it's quite far north of Silver Lake, and as you saw in terms of travel distances, it's quite long travel distances in terms of molecules of water. The pressure response is much faster, but still on the order of years, 1, 2, 3 years before you get significant pressure responses. So no, at these rates, I don't think the summer-winter issue would cause shallow groundwater conditions causing a problem at Silver Lake.
Okay, I can understand that. And I'm sorry for all these questions. Just that I'm not part of the total group that's doing all these studies. So my only opportunity to talk about this is here at these meetings.
Oh, thank you. Good questions.
Regarding the other point that was made regarding additional studies that TUMWA might do regarding flooding and these type of things, I'm a little concerned about the jurisdiction that TUMWA has under their charter for doing these regional studies that are normally the responsibility, I believe, of the county, who has the jurisdictional, I believe, authority to go in and do the regional study as compared to TUMWA. And so,
Greg, can I take that?
It's a legal question, I think, but.
So I'm not sure where you're coming from, Michael. TUMWA is not doing any flood studies related to this work. What Greg was trying to show was that the recharge would not increase shallow groundwater levels around Silver Lake. I think he stated very clearly that no impact around Swan Lake. One of the things we wanted to be sure of is that this recharge effort did not indirectly cause high groundwater conditions around Silver Lake, which could exacerbate existing flooding issues. That's our only look at flooding, and you're correct, Washoe County and the city of Reno are responsible for addressing stormwater and flood control issues. Tumwa is looking strictly at the groundwater conditions.
Yeah, thank you, John. I understood that. I was referencing another statement regarding that Tumwa was going to be doing a more extensive study in the basin. Well, it may not be a flood study. It was a more extensive study and model. And I'm just concerned that some of these more extensive studies should be under the umbrella of the county somehow, rather than a Tumwa, who is, I believe, more or less a water purveyor. So
again, Greg, if just a minute, and then you could fill in, but Tumwa is not doing a flood study, period. Greg, while you were at DRI, you started the project and it's still ongoing, and there is an update recently, but DRI was hired by the Corps of Engineers, I believe, to do a basin-wide surface water, groundwater assessment of the North Valleys. Could you talk about that, please?
Yes, that's correct. So DRI is being funded by the Corps of Engineers to look at the impact of surface water runoff on flooding. That is a separate project. Although we are on the technical advisory committee, we're not performing the project in any way. We share data and things like that, but we're not conducting the study. The first phase of that project is complete. They have a number of simulations where they've run the model over approximately a 100-year period to see the historical progression of flood stage in Swan Lake itself, and hopefully that'll be useful to managers in the area. But again, as John said, what we're doing at a regional scale is a groundwater study, not a surface water or flood study.
I'm sorry, I still understand that. I do understand that. But I'm hearing that Tumwa is doing a study that involves more than just a recharge and recovery project. They're trying to analyze how their recharge and recovery might affect domestic wells, for instance, and how it might cause water to surface or not. And they're choosing levels of 20 feet as being an acceptable level. The point is, I think there's a regional study that should be done that this study should be part of, that nobody seems to be doing, is the point I'm making. And maybe this is not the time to make that point, but we seem to be lacking a broader study that would include all these little sub-studies. And I'm not seeing that anybody's doing that. And if they are, because DRI is not doing, I've talked with them, they don't seem to be doing such a study. So the question I have is, who is doing the study, and maybe there's nobody.
Well, I'll say it is important for Tumwa to study the regional system. We have production wells throughout both the east and the west side, so we need to understand how a variety of management issues impact our wells. So that's why we're doing that study.
I understand.
I think Mr. Combs, or is this relating to the situation, to the discussion?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Drinkwater?
Okay, so a couple comments. And Mr. DiMartini, to your question about this particular study and the overall impact of A+ water. A+ water has always intended to be a water resource augmentation of some sort, where water is treated, put back into the ground, where that becomes a resource for the future from where I sit, as Tumwa, as our regional water utility, has a vested interest in understanding the groundwater and how an A+ system would affect their resources and their wells, and of course, the domestic wells that are closely located to the municipal wells. So I see the nexus clearly. I don't see anything nefarious here. To your point that there's more things that need to be done, I'd say we all agree that's absolutely true. We don't have perfect knowledge of the North Valley, certainly. And I do have a question on a different subject, but I will defer to Mr. Coombs because I don't want to change this.
I had nothing. I was just pointing out.
So because I am not a groundwater hydrologist, or not asking you to bury me in science, but just help me understand, in the 4 different scenarios you ran, and you said up to 50 years, we had various levels of groundwater extraction based upon your assumption from domestic wells, and then, of course, you input the TUMO wells, what you might extract. Does the model react to the fact that you now have larger point source extractions that might tend to move groundwater one direction or another? Or how do you account for the fact that you're putting a load on the aquifer at a specific location, and then the plume, for the lack of a better word, sorry, of the recharge water and how it would move with respect to that? That was incorporated in these graphs that show us, where the water would be in 50 years?
Yes, that is correct. So one thing I didn't mention, when we were running these scenarios, we actually assumed that there'd be 2 injection wells to get 2 million gallons per day actually into the ground. Both of those wells were assumed to be within the county parcel, the American Flat County parcel. So yes, that point source, if you will, was directly simulated in the model, and then we also simulated production from TUMO's wells and also from domestic wells.
But how it might change if you turn, TUMO, as you say, that you have 3 municipal wells in that area, down gradient from the injection site. If you use one as opposed to another one, how that might change the way the groundwater moves?
It would have a subtle difference, yes, but we ran actually many more models than were shown in the report. And basically what you're trying to do is actually just try to capture that injection water as it moves from the north to the south. So unless you put a well, really far to the west or east, I don't think it would have a large impact on the results. But if it's in the same general area, within a mile or 2 of those existing wells, I think the results would be somewhat similar. Regardless, if you were to pump the northern one a little bit more and the southern one a little bit less, things like that have less of an influence. But it would have an influence if you were to move the wells laterally a significant distance.
Thank you, sir.
Are there any other questions of the commission? Do you have anything to add, Mr. Smitherman?
No, nothing to add. Thank you.
Anything more, Mr. Paul?
No, thank you.
All right, well, the staff recommends that the commission accept the report and provide any direction for the staff.
Move to accept the report.
Got a motion by Mr. Martini, second by Mr. Coombs. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Moving on to item number 8, the report on TUMO's Bedell Flat hydrogeologic investigation and possible direction to staff. Christian Kropp, senior hydrogeologist.
Good afternoon to the Commission. Christian Kropp, hydrogeologist with Truckee Meadows Water Authority. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the work we've done in Bedell Flat, the hydrogeologic investigation that you helped fund twice now. We appreciate the help getting this project started. Little outline of where I'll take you today. Project vision, we've already gone over that a little bit with Greg's slide, and John and Rick will go over a little bit about that more later. I'll talk about Bedell Flat in particular, the overview and timeline of this 3 to 4 year project. Talk about the first round of funding that we received from Northern Nevada Water Planning Commission, talking about the initial infiltration feasibility study that was done in last year, September of 2018, and then go into the current work that you just funded last August. We're already out there making progress. Then go into the USGS partnership and future work that'll continue in the coming years. So this is part of, as Greg mentioned, and John and Rick will talk about, part of the broader One Water Nevada project. I'll be talking about Bedell Flat to the north, and for reference, that's about 25 to 30 miles north of Reno, depending on which way you get in. So why Bedell Flat? We think it is favorable due to proximity to infrastructure. It's within 1 to 10 miles of recharge infrastructure. It's relatively undeveloped. About 92+% of the land in Bedell Flat is BLM property. It has favorable geologic materials. From the limited studies we've been able to, that have been done in that area, we have a pretty good idea that there's a bank or a storage zone that could act as a water bank for the future. Again, there haven't been many studies out there. There are 3 wells in the basin. One of them is Tumwas that we just completed a year ago. So we're just scratching the surface on the availability of storage space out there. Multiple options for recharge, spreading basins or RIBs, rapid infiltration basins, injection wells, that's a no-brainer out there, and potentially applying water through an ephemeral drainage, the Bird Springs drainage, which readily accepts water and infiltrates during storms. We've actually seen that infiltrate right in front of our eyes and during storms. It's really cool to see. So, project overview, we're trying to answer one simple question: is recharge feasible in Bedell Flat? Simple question, hard to answer. A number of other questions we have to answer to answer that one question. Some of which, are there any low permeability layers that would prevent infiltration? Can we get water in the ground? Is there sufficient storage capacity in the unsaturated zone? How big is that unsaturated zone? How much water can it store? For how long? Can that water then, once it's stored, be recovered? It's one thing to get it in the ground. Can you get it back out when you need to? And then could naturally occurring chemicals like nitrate or arsenic affect groundwater quality? We've seen impacts to groundwater from nitrate in other basins and in other areas of the state. We would investigate that as well. Are the recharge waters and native waters compatible? That's a big question. And then how might the recharge waters affect water levels, flow, and transport in the basin? So to answer those questions and many more, we put together this project timeline. It's a roughly 8-phase project with 2 kind of preliminary phases of work that we've been working on prior to 2019. So to date, we've put in, I'll start in the upper left. I don't have a pointer or any way to guide you through it, but start in the upper left, cascade down, and we'll wander around a little bit. So the Tumwa work to date, we put in a new well in early 2018, one of 3 wells in the basin to give us a little more information on what's going on out there. We've watched infiltration occur in the Bird Springs drainage with help from the USGS. That red highlighted area in that first square, that's money that we received from NNWPC to get this project started last year, and I'll go over that in the next coming slides. We've worked together closely with BLM and the USGS to come up with our overall scope and comprehensive plan. BLM has been a great partner in this, worked together with other regional partners, City of Reno, Washoe County, and others to really get behind this and keep the project moving forward and kick it off. From there, we're working on currently with the current funding that was just approved, what we're calling phase 1 initial infiltration feasibility study. So the first phase looked at, can we get water in the ground? All we could study was the first 8 feet. The second phase, we're going much deeper. We're going all the way to the water table and a little bit beyond to investigate the infiltration capacity and storage capacity of that aquifer. From there, we've already started, if you look at the today line, we've already completed the application surveys and started to prepare the environmental assessment application for the BLM. It's in their hands. They haven't had a chance to review it yet. They just got 4 projects that came down the pike, and they're a little log jammed, but they're trying to get back to us and keep this moving forward. In the meantime, we are going to jump up to phase 4. We can do that concurrently while they're reviewing, because we don't need a permit to do this work in phase 4. Geophysics, geochemistry, aquifer testing, again, answering all those questions that we had at the onset. Once the permit's approved, we'll move to phase 5. So everything we did in phase 1 on the small scale, which we're doing right now, which is 10 monitoring wells, we'll expand that out to a larger area to get a better idea of where this infiltration might occur, where a good site for recharge might possibly exist in the basin. From there, we go to that recovery question. Can you get the water back out of the ground? After that's found successful, if it is, we'll move to phase 7 and do some larger, longer duration, larger pilot scale testing for RIBs and injection wells. If that's found successful, we'll complete the geologic information with phase 8, update the groundwater model, get a better idea of where that recharge water might go, how long it might be stored, and when we might have to recover that water. And at that point, we come to a decision point. We've found a location, we've got an idea of how much and where to store that water, how long it might exist, or before we have to extract it, and then move on to phase 9, which would be the next round of permit applications to actually construct something. So the first round of funding we received from the commission in August, or I'm sorry, probably in 2017. We did the work officially in August and October, through October of 2018. If you look here on the map, again, I don't have a pointer, but starting from the bottom left of that diagram, that's the Bird Springs Drainage and the Bird Springs Road coming off of Red Rock Road. So if you go to Animal Ark, go another probably 3 miles, 4 miles, you'll end up at Bird Springs Road, take a right, take that all the way down to the bottom to a corral. That's pretty much our field site. There's nothing out there but cows and a corral. If you see a drill rig, that's us. So we started off with a BLM permit. That's a one-liner, and I don't know how many small characters that is, but that's a lot of work to get that done and get this project off the ground. From there, we worked with an outfit out of Arizona called GSA Consultants, and we put in a number of potholes. Potholes, it's essentially just taking a backhoe and digging down 8 feet, collecting, as you can see next to the trench there, little piles of soil in 1 foot increments, getting a good idea of what's going on that first 8 feet. We characterize the soil to determine the physical properties, what might we be able to infiltrate through that upper 8 feet. You can't see it in this picture, but I'm smiling like crazy because I got to geek out with a world-renowned hydrogeologist, a guy who's got an equation named after him. That was pretty cool. From there, we did more testing at the surface with some small diameter ring infiltration tests. In the foreground of that picture, you can see the small ring infiltration infiltrometer. It's really a ring you put water in, and you can measure how fast that goes into the ground at the land surface. Behind that, in the background, you can see we got a big water truck, some other rigs. That's a large diameter ring infiltration test, and I'll show you that. So those large diameter tests occurred in 12 different areas in Bird Springs, along Bird Springs Road, and in the Sandhills Wash. These were in areas that were previously permitted, so we took advantage of those. The pits, or the ring infiltration tests start out with a 6x6 pit, about 3 to 4 feet deep, depending on the on favorable soils to do the test. We install instrumentation in the bottom of that to measure infiltration as water is being applied. We put a 4-foot diameter culvert in there, tip it on its edge. That one's about 3 feet long. Put that into the soil about 2 to 3 inches. Backfill it, compact around it, and then start filling it with water. And we measure that over time throughout the day. And then when night falls, we all have to go home. We have instrumentation in there to measure the water infiltrating at night. At the end of the project, we returned it to its original state. It made the BLM very, very happy. And at the end of this study, you've got the report with you. I can't go through all the information and all the data, but I guess the outcome is that we have 6 areas with very high infiltration rates that seemed favorable to infiltration. Again, that's only in that upper 8 feet, but we're seeing infiltration rates anywhere from 2 to over 50 feet per day. Requirements from the NDEP, they like to see at least 4 feet per day. So we're excited at this point. So from here, we started planning the next phase. We took those 6 areas with high infiltration rates, added a couple more sites to gain additional geologic information, and came to you guys, asked for some grant money, provided it, and now we're out there getting some work done. So starting last month, we started officially phase 1 hydrogeologic investigation in Bedell Flat. And again, this has to deal, this phase deals with that deeper zone. The first one was 0 to 8 feet. Now we're going deep, all the way to the water table, roughly 180 to 200 feet deep. How much water can be stored? Are there any clay layers that are deal breakers? Soil and groundwater chemistries, are they compatible? Trying to answer all those questions with this first round of work. Again, the BLM permit had to be renewed. So we got that going and got that done. Again, thanks to the BLM for helping us get that done fairly quickly. With the grant funds we've purchased, and this weather station is being built right now. It'll be available in November for installation. The USGS will install that and monitor it over time. And so currently we're out there installing these 10 monitoring wells in the 8 locations I previously mentioned, getting information on deep soil characterization, soil chemistry, soil porosity, and permeability. We're collecting those samples, and part of the grant funds that you've provided will go to analyzing those samples at a soils lab in Colorado. And then once the monitoring wells are drilled and developed, we'll get groundwater levels and groundwater quality over time. That'll help us to understand flow and movement of groundwater in relation to any recharge activities. So a few pictures of what we're doing out there right now. Here's our the rig that we've got on site from an outfit out of Washington. It's a small sonic rig, so we've tried very hard to keep our impact to BLM property to a minimum, and this is helping. It's a very small rig, usually used on small sites for groundwater contamination work, but this one is it's perfect for Bedell Flat. It's a sonic rig, so what it'll do, it'll take, it uses vibrations to allow that hollow stem, you can see through it a bit there, hollow stem drill bit to work down 10 feet at a time and pull back a solid core. So that makes characterization of the soils really a no-brainer. We don't have it coming up in a mixed mud source. We can actually lay it out, and you can see here they come out in 2-foot bags. We lay it out in 10-foot increments. USGS is on site helping us characterize these soils. A couple of PhDs there helping us do that work. And we can also take split spoon samples, which we've collected a number of those already to send to that lab that you've helped fund. And in the end, we end up with a monitoring well. And again, that'll help us collect groundwater levels and groundwater quality over time. So the last part I wanted to mention, this is, we've worked closely with the USGS, and they've come to the table with close to $500,000 to help us fund roughly 4 phases of this project. Tomo's coming to the table with almost $650,000. USGS is matching roughly 43%, and that number could go up over 50% depending on their funding into the future. And they're pretty positive that 43% match will go up. Again, that's in addition to other matching funds that we have from regional partners. Not as high, but we're getting some help. So phases 1 and 5, again, they're helping us with that, the deep soil infiltration feasibility. Phase 4, a lot of geophysics, geochemistry, and aquifer tests. We haven't started that yet. That'll occur after we get these monitoring wells installed. And a number of bullets under each of these. I won't go into each of them. And then phase 7, which is really the crux of the whole project. Once we find out if we get green lights on all these other phases, we'll know where we might want to do some large-scale pilot testing, longer duration, 3 to 6 month infiltration studies. We'll come out with hopefully a recharge site selection with a volume, recharge rate, and then end with a final report. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Are there any questions from the commission? Yes.
Just not a question, but a clarification. Thank you, Christian. For these recharge tests, the source of the water would be Fish Springs groundwater because the pipeline runs through Bedell Flat. And so we would tie into that pipeline and probably bring over a temporary pipeline to the recharge sites to be able to do those long-term tests because there's really no other source of water out there to be able to do that with.
Anything else from the commission? Have anything else to add?
I just wanted to thank Christian for putting this together. I know that you're busy out in the field with the drilling of the monitoring wells and that sort of thing, so appreciate you. Appreciate Tomo making Christian available. Also, thanks to Greg for your presentation. You guys put together a concise report and you know, try to keep the time frame concise too, so I just appreciate that a lot. I appreciate Frank prior to that for his presentation as well. I want to acknowledge the state of Nevada. They're making $40,000. This is the second increment of $40,000 that they're making available to pass through and fund this too. So it's not technically the Regional Water Management Fund in the end. The state will reimburse us for the money that we pass through. So thank you, gentlemen.
Okay. So staff is recommending the commission accept the report. So entertain a motion to accept the report.
I'll move that we accept the report.
Motion by Mr. Houck. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Solaro. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, next item on the agenda, we have a report on activities of the One Water Nevada project, including location of and access to project information and reports and possible direction to staff. Rick Warner, Warner and Associates, John Enlow, Tumwa, Jim Smitherman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go ahead and kick this one off and then turn it over to Rick. Last month, the commission requested a report on the disposition and access to project information and reports resulting from feasibility study looking at Category A+ reclaimed water. That's being branded at One Water Nevada now. Rick will share a little bit more about that. Rick is he'll have a brief presentation on the subject that I just introduced. He's a former Washoe County senior engineer in the Community Services Department, now consulting along with UNR concerning the A+ reclaimed water. So either he or I or both of us will address your request for the reports and the subjects therein. Thanks, Rick. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jim. Chairman, Commissioners, again, Rick Warner, representing One Water Nevada with a team, so well done. Technical reports, and the two previous reports from Greg and Christian and Nick's contributed as well, kind of reflect the body of work that's being generated. Is very complex, technical, and we've had previous requests of, okay, as work is generated and nice reports are produced, where's the data reside and how can the commission and public access the reports that are being generated under One Water Nevada. So with that, I don't really have a technical update, but anytime that we are presenting on One Water Nevada, we'd like to just give maybe just a quick update on our activities because things move along quickly and there might be folks on the commission or the public that aren't exactly familiar with what One Water Nevada represents. With that, I just want to make sure we sort of get ourselves grounded. One Water Nevada is an initiative, it's not an entity. It was created in 2016 by those founding agencies at the bottom, including this body and the Western Regional Water Commission as well. The vision is to collectively, collaboratively, using all those agencies as resources to look at more sustainable water management practices in the Truckee Meadows. The initial focus is determining if the state of Nevada's newly categorized reclaimed water quality A+, which really created the regulatory framework for indirect potable reuse in Nevada, does that offer any significant implementation advantages for the Truckee Meadows region? And with that, there's been a whole host of activities that have been ongoing. We just heard great reports on the hydrogeological evaluations, but there's been other work that's been presented to this group as well, including project development, that project rationale, the triple bottom line analysis that UNR has produced. There's been a lot of public engagement. You've seen our brochures. There's been a regulatory framework initiated with the state NDEP. And so, you know, all this work is coming together over a 5-year period. All those member agencies are contributing significant financial and staff resources. It's about a 5-year study that will take upwards of $10 million of cash outlays and an enormous amount of staff resources, in-kind services as well. Some of the key questions that we're trying to address is not, you know, necessarily do a big binder paper exercise, but as you heard from the previous two gentlemen, really dive into more of the technical details. If A+ water, which is indirect potable reuse in Nevada, if it were produced, in this region? Would there be beneficial aquifers to store the water? What are the advanced water treatment technologies that are needed? How do we engage the public? Make sure that we understand how water rights and water markets might be affected. So it's a really much more technically in-depth study. And we're casting this under a feasibility study under the regional A+ regional feasibility study purposes. Okay. So you've heard various reports for the last couple of years from our group. We've done a number of treatment technologies. We're studying the water treatment technologies that would be needed to produce A+ quality water. We've been focused in on the South Truckee Meadows, doing a number of pilot studies on treatment technologies through the research foundations that we partner with, and also the University of Nevada, Reno. We're moving this right now as we speak for an in-depth study at the Reno Stead Water Reclamation Facility. This will be the first time that we'll produce A+ quality water for possible injection locally to study the full sort of suite of all the technologies that would go together, and we would have a very in-depth evaluation done at the mid-part of 2020. You just heard two great reports on American Flat and Bedell. At least the timeline there captures the early part of Christian's work at Bedell Flat. But again, sort of the purpose of doing these hydrogeological evaluations to understand is if the water is produced A+ quality, is there reasonable places to store water for a long-term viability? Okay. So wow, that should just dazzle you with all the activities that are going on that have to be managed on a day-to-day basis. American Flat and Bedell there are listed. There's other projects at that similar magnitude that are going on at any given moment, any day. There's probably 30 or 40 major activities going on by all the partner agencies and consultants and University of Nevada, Reno. I'd probably highlight the top four on the right: water rights, water markets, low energy, climate change. That was actually a study that was initiated by Washoe County, the One Water team, and the Bureau of Reclamation. I'll highlight that just to come back to it the next slide. So Jim, this is kind of the body of the report is, as information is gathered and reports are synthesized, what sort of happens with this data, where is it stored and located, who can access it, and so forth. And so there's many high-level reports. This isn't the full listing of high-level reports that are available, but you can see some of them, it's very faint. Some are draft. We tend to like to present draft reports to our commissions and other bodies that have financed the work. Eventually, the plan is that the reports will be housed at a One Water Nevada website. That website is currently in a beta version. It's supposed to go live the first part of 2020. It resides right now under access of the partner agency staff, their IT staff, public information officers. Sort of their creative folks can look at the websites, make sure that they're functioning properly before they go live. But the idea, Jim, is all these reports will be ready on the website portal when they're finalized. When they're draft reports, the preference is to bring before bodies like Christian and Greg did earlier, give the body the full report, make the substantial findings available. When the report is actually finalized, they'll be posted on the website for public access. The idea behind that is, if I go back to that previous slide and I highlighted water rights, water markets, low energy treatment technologies, that was a study that Bureau of Reclamation has financed as well. So although we finished our work, Bureau of Reclamation needs to look at it, finalize the report on their end, and then we would post it on our website. Okay. So Jim, I think that's kind of covers the major body of the work is sort of understanding the complexity of work that's being presented and prepared and where it intends to be located at. Kind of looking at the overall schedule of One Water Nevada activities. Won't go into this at all, but really by the end of 2016, the state formed and finalized their regulatory framework for A+ regulations. And then our work started immediately in 2017, and we expect that to last at least about 5 years. Through our technical evaluations, we feel like we're right about middle point right now, about 50% through the entire project. Obviously, we're creating a lot of great information, and things look very promising. Particularly our biggest item that we're looking at right now is item number 9, really starting a fuller scale demonstration project at the Reno Stead Water Reclamation Facility, January 1, that'll last about 6 months. So a lot of great progress, a lot of great data that's being collected. And again, back to this sort of partial list of final reports, the idea would be that draft reports are brought before commissions and councils for a report out, including the written reports that are attached to your agenda item. When reports go final, they'd be posted to the website portal. Jim? I hope that adequately covers your agenda item, Jim and Chairman. The project sponsors are the 8 agencies, but the lead people we've listed up here, John Enlow, myself, Lydia Perry, and also Krishna Pigila at the University of Nevada, Reno. That ends my presentation.
Right, thanks, Rick. Okay, so, and I hope that addresses the request for the disposition location and when reports and data would be made available to the commission and to the public in general. So with that, I'm sure Rick could field any questions, but I'll take whatever I can field as well if the commission has any.
Any questions from the commission? Okay, well, the staff recommends the commission accept the report.
Yes.
So I entertain a motion to accept the report.
Move to accept.
Motion by Mr. Zimmerman, do I second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Martini. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Okay, we'll move on then to item number 10, which is the program manager's report. Mr. Smitherman.
Okay. Thanks, Rick. Appreciate you making time to come down too. Okay, program manager's report. Again, you're familiar with the spreadsheets that we provide you on this subject. So on the front side of your staff report, agenda item 10A is status report for the projects that are being funded by the Western Regional Water Commission. I think we've pretty much cleaned up the report to remove all of the projects that have been completed. And so these are all, you can see, less than 100%, and some significantly less than 100% complete because they are fairly newly initiated projects. If you have questions on any of those, I won't run through them line by line, but I can answer the question, or Chris, I'm sure, can answer questions if I can't. On the flip side, 10B is the financial status report. It shows it's through period 4, so that would be through October. It looks like there's a little lag in posting up some of the revenue because we're just about at the same point as we were last meeting a month ago. So I don't know exactly when things get posted up as far as revenue coming in, but you can see that we've collected about 25% of our annual revenue projections. And coming at the end of the irrigation season, I would expect that we're going to see a big lump of cash in revenue next time we bring this report to you. Expenditures at the bottom of the spreadsheet are low, so there may be a lag in posting some of that up as well. So hopefully this report will catch up to real time in a month or two when we bring you a report next time. So if you have any questions on that, I'd be happy to field them. Otherwise, that's what I have for that report.
Any questions from the commission? Yes, Mr. Drinkwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smitherman, as discussions with other staff from other agencies recently, we were discussing the fact that some months ago, I believe this body gave a tacit green light to a steamboat ditch study. We were looking at steamboat ditch as it relates to flooding in the south end of the Truckee Meadows, and we budgeted some money, and we also were anticipated using some contingency money to supplement that budget. That project is not on your sheet, and we're just trying to understand where it is in its life, and if we're going to see something soon, maybe, or you could bring us up to date here.
I appreciate your question and your concern about that. I have not seen a final scope of work yet. I know that a draft scope of work exists. So there was a question of finalizing that commensurate with the amount of funding available. I don't believe that the Western Regional Water Commission funding was going to be the total amount that would be dedicated to that project, and I think there was some securing of funds from another entity that Washoe County would be trying to line up. And so In short, I'm still waiting, and I don't know what the timeline would be on getting the final scope of work on that one.
But you seem confident that there will be a scope of work forthcoming? Because it sounded like the alternative, or excuse me, the supplemental funding was not certain, that other, Washoe County is looking for some grant money perhaps or something?
I think it's from the city of Reno, actually.
I apologize.
Looking for some kind of collaboration on the project. So that was the last that I'd heard of it. I haven't asked about it recently, but I will run that back into the department and bring you a report next meeting.
Thanks, sir.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Jim. All right, I guess we'll move on then to item number 11, discussion regarding location and possible agenda items for November 2019 commission meeting and other future meetings.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next regularly scheduled meeting would be on November 6th, but as I'm checking my calendar, I realize that I'm going to be on vacation on November 6th. So I don't know how that happened, but I'm not going to argue because I don't set the schedule for vacations. So if you choose to have a meeting that day, that would be great with Mr. Wessel. He would head it up. And what we would have generally on the agenda for that one, as you remember from past years, would be the annual priorities workshop. And then also on deck, Chris and I need to bring you a report on the 5-year review of the Regional Water Management Plan. That it would be due in January of 2021. That's 10 years from the initial plan submitted to the Nevada legislature. So we've reviewed it and updated it once. This would be the second review and update of the plan. So those two things would be coming up at your next meeting. If you want to do those on November 6th, I'll leave those in Chris's hands and help him prepare as much as possible. Alternatively, if the following meeting date would be December 4th, and I think typically we get a bunch of work done at the November workshop, and we don't meet in December. I don't think we met in December last year. So if you want me here, we can push that meeting off until December 4th and do it then. But I would leave the choice up to you.
Any thoughts from the commission? So I guess the question is whether we're going to have the meeting on November 6th.
Correct.
Is the commission okay with going forward with the meeting on November 6th with the priorities workshop? Is that correct? Guess we're okay?
Yeah, I guess. Well,
right.
Okay. So
all right.
You okay with doing that?
Yeah, we'll keep the schedule for November 6th meeting.
Okay. And plan on the priorities workshop on November 6th.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. And then we'll bring you a report on the 5-year review then in December.
Okay.
Jim, location for that, or I'm sorry, Chris, since it'll be your meeting. Do it here with the workshop?
Well, typically we've done it here for the meeting portion, and then the workshop will be upstairs. No, I think that would be, that seems to be the most acceptable format.
Okay, so you convene here,
Right.
do the front matter, adjourn, go upstairs to the conference room and do the workshop.
Okay. Good. All right, anything else on the agenda? Okay, we're going to move on then to item number 12, commission comments. Any comments from the commission? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on then. Staff comments.
I think we got everything out. Thanks.
Okay.
No additional comments.
Okay, then we'll move on then to public comments. Item number 14, 3-minute time limit per person. I don't have any cards. Don't see anybody coming forward, so move on then to item number 15, adjournment. So do we need a motion on that?
Nope, you can declare it.
All right, I'll declare the meeting adjourned. 3:39 p.m.